Okay, welcome to the first podcast series with Tony Chen, Dr. Tony Chen. How do we call you? What do we call you, Tony? Is it
Yeah,
Dr.
just Tony's fine.
Tony's fine?
Don't call me doctor. That's I always feel weird about that. Let's just go
Wh-
with Tony.
what are your qualifications, Tony, by the way?
So MBBS is what Melbourne Uni. That's my medical degree. It's called medical. I think Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery. I've got a B Med Sci. I've got a couple of specialties. Ranscar is my radiology specialty. College of Physicians is my nuclear medicine, and then I've got another thing, and I've got a direct Doctor of Medicine as well. I think so. I've got a few letters after my name. But
Great.
yep, I don't like any of that. Just call me Tony. That's totally
We'll
fine.
call you Tony. My name's Phillip Almeida, and Tony, we've been working together for some time now, just talking all things property. And we've been obviously helping a lot of our kind of medical professionals build out their portfolios, but over the years, they've come to us with a number of questions and queries about what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing. So I think this podcast is really timely, and it'd be good to actually go through maybe some of the questions and dilemmas that all of our doctors are thinking about all the time in relation to property. So I thought we'd start today talking about you, Tony, talking about your journey in terms of where you started. We've got a lot of clients very similar to your background, first, second generation. But I think it'd be great to kind of let's start from the start and just talk about you and in your property journey and where you started studying. If you went back 10 years, 15 years, what you would have done differently. So it'd be great to get your take on things and fire away.
Yeah, thanks. And look, I'm pretty excited we're doing this. And the reason I think this will be really good is that for someone like myself, let's say from 10 years ago, I would love to have a resource like this. And I'm hoping people listening will get something out of it. Definitely from you, Phil, because you're an expert. I'm just tagging along with my stories, but hopefully it'll be at least entertaining. So I am a radiologist and nuclear medicine specialist, and most of the listeners here will be doctors, so they probably know what that is. And it is two separate specialists. So I'm dual trained. I had to go through two different specialty trainings. That whole process. So I started medical school when I was 17. So first year of med school was just probably just start of 18. Uh, I'm not sure if you know this, Phil, so I'll explain it to you. So we did 6 years of medical school in Melbourne Uni, 1 year of internship, and that was at Royal Melbourne Hospital. I did 2 more years of residency. And residency in Australia is a little bit different to America, where we're essentially kind of in no man's land. We're trying to get into a specialty training, but not there yet. So you apply to become a specialist. And once you get into a specialty training program, and in my case, it was radiology, then you do the years to train. And during those years as you're training, you become a registrar. The registrar is usually 5, 6, 7 year process, depending on the specialty. So for me, it was 5. I finished radiology and then did 2 extra years of training as a nuclear medicine doctor. So if you add all of that up, what is that? 6 years plus one
Long
plus
time.
two, that's nine. So that's 17 years of studying total. So it's a lot of years, right? The thing is, we are not like we're pretty much junior doctors during all that time. We're still earning money, but we're not earning like big money that people think doctors are earning. So my first job out, I was earning $19 an hour as an intern.
19.
Yeah, 19. I was dating a nurse at the time briefly, and she was earning more than me, and she was a first year nurse. So I was a
Wow.
first year doctor. And yeah, junior doctors are not very good. They're higher than 19 now. It was just like 15 years ago, but it wasn't great. Then you gradually sort of build up your wage, but the most of the time you're working, right? So my first week as a doctor, I did 103 hours. So that was 1 week.
Is that all? Is that all just for the week?
So my first day I did 17 hours and I did 6 of those days. And I think on Sunday I did 12 hours. It was a lot of hours. So the thing is, you gradually do earn more and more, but you have no idea. You're just earning money and it just goes into a bank and you have no idea what you're doing with it.
Yeah.
You're learning medicine, you're not learning how to invest. So I did actually start to invest in property with my parents.
Who told you to, and what made you in terms of your decision-making process to buy that first property?
My parents bought a house when we first immigrated to Australia, and that was year 2000. And they bought a house in Blackburn for 190,000, which was at the time huge money for them. Like they were earning. nothing. They were immigrant parents with pretty much nothing. And I think within 3 or 4 years, they sold it for 600,000 or something like that. It was a quarter acre at the time. So for them, it was like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. Like they earn more money than they've ever seen in their life from this one house. And obviously it wasn't taxed, it was a owner occupier. And a few years after that, when I was starting to earn, they were like, well, put some money into real estate. But they had no idea what they were doing. The only reason they made any money is because they got lucky, right? Which is you just ride the wave. But I had no idea what I was doing. The first house we bought wasn't a house; it was a unit. We've just sold it a couple of years ago. It didn't do well.
It often can set you back 5 to 10 years in that decision-making process if you make the wrong call. So having that education at the start is really important. My other question is, why did you become a doctor?
Oh, because I'm Asian. I mean, my parents were like, "You can be any doctor you want." That was the choice I had.
Yeah.
I wanted to be an architect, which I don't think I'm doing very good at. So I'll be a
Lawyer?
bad
Was
architect.
lawyer ever
No.
discussed?
Lawyer, yeah, I started with law.
Yes.
So I did med law as a double degree to begin with. Dropped law pretty fast because it was boring. Medicine at least has some pictures. Pretty sure I have ADHD. I just can't read for more than 2 minutes. I can look at the pictures, which medicine had lots of nice, colorful pictures. I can do that. Probably why I'm doing radiology now because I'll just look at pictures. But reading was really not my strong suit. The whole thing with Asian families is that as an immigrant, you become a doctor because that completely flips your narrative. You start off poor and then suddenly you're rich. And suddenly you have status and suddenly you have a lot of money to buy a house and have food on the table. Because when I was growing up, we didn't really have food. Like we struggled to even feed ourselves. Well, being a doctor really completely changed that in one generation.
But you're not the only person there. And speaking from our client experiences, a lot of their parents, first and second generation parents that have helped their kids become doctors, it is a very common theme that I've seen, especially with a lot of our offshore doctors moving to Australia. They get pushed into a regional. They study extremely hard, but it's the financial literacy along the road that we probably need to focus on and help them grow. So after you bought your first property, what did you do after that?
So that was always going to be an investment property. And then we actually bought a house in Brunswick that we lived in. And again, it's doing terribly. So this was 7, 8 years ago now. And it pretty much, and then this, unfortunately, it's Melbourne. The prices just hasn't moved. So again, in hindsight is very easy. Would have done things differently. I mean, this is where this podcast comes in, right? We need to have a chat about how we actually help people who were in my position 10 years ago set it up. Because, like you said, it really, I think, it set me back quite a while. At the time, I was earning a junior doctor's wage.
And how much was that?
I think we were like $50, $60 an hour,
Yep.
which was good. Like, it's good money
Good money.
for Australia, but it's not what a doctor is, what you consider a doctor wage. Nonetheless, I was lucky enough to be able to buy a house and had that investment property in the past. So this is obviously better than that average Australian, but nonetheless, as an investment tool, it didn't work out because I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just like, I'm living in Brunswick, I'm going to buy a house.
Yeah, and that's the conundrum that a lot of our doctors are in. They usually go and buy their first place in terms of the nearest hospital they're consulting to, and there's no modelling around that. So, and when did you buy that Brunswick place? What year?
Yeah, it was 2017. We were literally at the peak. It was literally the week of the peak. I remember buying it and then just watch the price fall straight
Yes.
after.
Yeah.
And then just fall and fall and fall and fall. And anyway, it's okay. Let's just have to write it out. It's a really good location. But like I think if I just go back to the original point that, I studied for 17 years to become a specialist, and most doctors do. Even GPs, they study a lot because GPs require specialization. And what ends up happening is you're so good at medicine, you become quite confident at life afterwards. A lot of people are, but we're almost blindly confident about things.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're not like all doctors have some money. Some doctors have a lot of money, but all doctors have some money because the wages are above average. But what ends up happening is I think there's an overconfidence that you actually know what you're doing with that money. And that's where you start to make the mistakes.
Yeah, and if you do it in a very slow manner, and I see a lot of our young doctors, the first thing they want to do is go and buy a development. They want to go and develop and build one townhouse or two townhouses or three townhouses. And often I see, they go and buy the two, but they don't actually factor in the running costs, or the development costs of actually undertaking that project. So, the golden rule, if you can start slow and just build it up over time and look to possibly even rent invest rather than buy your first home, there are other options to consider. So you're no different. 15 to 20 years is the norm until you actually start generating good income. It's how do we reduce the risk during those 15 years? That is the goal, and making sure you're making the right decisions along the way.
That's a great segue to my question, which is what some of the doctors asked, especially the junior doctors. Going back to, let's say, where I was as an intern, earning not $19 an hour anymore, but relatively low wages, relatively. What do you think a junior doctor should do?
Well, what they shouldn't be doing is basically going buying their first property and taking on way too much debt. Their ability to, I've always told my young doctors, go and concentrate on your studies, get that out of the way, because your earning capacity will increase over time. With our young doctors, we try and tell them to, if they can start saving a deposit of $50,000 to $80,000, that's a great start off point. And more often than not, buying your first home in that particular area is not necessarily the best decision for them. I always try and say, this first purchase that you make isn't going to be your forever home. So try and treat it as an investment, and let's look at the asset, because they may get shifted off to another hospital, another state. They might even work overseas for 2 or 3 years. So this needs to have the ability for growth. And I think growth is the number one sort of thing that we look after in a young doctor's journey. We say, if it can generate that growth by the time they're 30, 35, hopefully they've got 2 or 3 investments under their belt, and they've got enough equity either to buy into a partnership, buy their first home when they find a partner, probably pay off what was your HEX debt at the time? Was it 100,000, 200,000?
I wasn't 200, but yeah, it's probably
It was up
around
there.
100K.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting more and more now for everyone else. So
Well, this is the thing that we have to factor in. So all these particular items that, when in the first 10 years of their studying and being relocated across Australia, before they become specialized, it's about making sure that if they're on $100,000, we want 10 or 15% of their income to going out and helping them build their portfolio. But don't start off with an asset at 400 to 500, overlay that with data. So they might not necessarily buy an asset in Melbourne. There are other markets to consider, and you've got to look at the cyclical nature of these particular markets as well. So I would very much concentrate on growth in the first 10 years of a doctor's life journey. I would make sure that the property that they buy, if they started off with something at $500,000, we don't want that particular asset to cost them any more than 15 to 20 grand a year to run before tax, because you're usually on the lowest wage and it incrementally increases up over time. Based on their wage, they can negatively gear that particular property. And then as the property increases in value and we need to see 20, 30% uplift in asset one, we just continue to just go through this process of every 3 to 5 years and going and look at that next asset. Now, you can buy positively geared assets as well, and you can buy, you can negatively gear the asset as well. So they're very different in terms of the quality. I'm very strong with our doctors that it needs to be very research based, like you're doing your studies and becoming a doctor. We have a data business that we kind of rely on, and you've seen our clock a number of times in terms of you've got markets
yeah,
that
we might have to go through that cock a little bit later. But
yeah, we will.
Sorry.
We'll go through that maybe on the next podcast. You've got to make sure that the first 10 years is all about growth. And if you're concentrating on income and you're too heavily weighted to income, that affects the ability for that asset to grow in value, I find. So, and as the doctor gets older and they've bought their medical practice and they've upgraded their home, then we have an allocation to commercial property. But in the first 10 years, I always tell my doctors, go and rent invest, live in the areas that you enjoy living in, and go and rent in those particular areas. And if there's other markets that represent better value, then go and invest in those markets. So it's about us as a business trying to make sure that that doctor is accountable and they're not investing in the wrong markets at the wrong time. You look at that Brunswick unit, if we had you and we had that conversation back in 2017, I would have told you that Melbourne units from 2012 up until now, how much growth do you think they've generated for an average what was it? As a two bedroom, what did you have?
It's two bedroom.
Two bedroom. So a two bedroom unit in Melbourne would have probably had negative growth over that period. By the time you paid your stamp duty, you
Oh,
might
it's
be,
100% negative. Yeah.
yeah. So you might be 10% up in terms of the value that you've purchased, but look at all your holding costs, your interest costs. A lot of doctors can gear up to 90%. They can get, if they go to a bank, the banks will look at their lending positions fairly favorably. So you've got this real opportunity as a doctor to try and build your wealth up over that 10, 15 years while you're studying. Just don't take on too much debt on your first home. Do it properly. And we always try and get them to rent invest if they can.
I think the main thing to take away from that is, at least with my experience, it's just everything you read and see. It's like you put some money into real estate, you're going to make money. When that's just actually not the case at all.
That's garbage. That's complete
Yeah.
garbage. When you see those articles come out from the media, you've often missed the opportunity within that market. So when, you've got The Age or the Herald Sun talking about the next, hot spot or hot market, I think it's a very, we don't particularly agree with that view in terms of how to look at residential markets across Australia. Overlay it with data, make sure the data makes sense, and we'll run through some of the metrics that a doctor should be looking at if they're going to look at buying a property themselves, whether it's an investment or their home. Make sure the data makes sense, and if it does, then go and do it. But don't go and buy something just because the Herald Sun has just gone out and told you to go and do that, because you've often missed that particular opportunity if they're talking about it. We probably would be advising that doctor to probably sell that asset by the time the Herald Sun or someone else is talking about that particular opportunity, because you're too late.
Funny you should mention, like, the newspapers and whatnot, because I'm on Facebook and social media and whatnot, and there's always someone that's like bought 100 houses and they got into debt super early. Like they just borrowed up to the hilt and then say, this is how you got to do it. You mentioned as a junior doctor that you shouldn't get into too much debt. And all the stuff you see on social media is like some 28-year-old owns 100 properties and earning $10 million a year or something stupid. I mean, clickbait, obviously. But if property market is always shifting up, and it doesn't seem like the government wants the property to drop, why wouldn't you want to just borrow to the hilt and then buy the best property you can? Because wouldn't that make sense?
Well,
And get on that wave.
It's a great question, and I get asked this question by a lot of our young, hungry sort of doctors coming through. They've just finished their training, their incomes, they're earning over $150,000 a year, and they're saying, well, why don't we go and mortgage to the hilt? I think it comes down to there's two things here. There's good debt and there's bad debt. The other thing that we need to think about is they need to look at the asset quality that they're buying. If they're buying an asset, there's a lot of these particular groups out there that, you see people like that owning 15, 20 properties. If interest rates increase, and obviously cost of living and inflation, it's not the actual interest rates that's the killer. It's the cost of living and inflation that is the real trigger here, that it's almost the silent killer that people don't really talk about all that much. And if you look at inflation over the last 3 to 4 years versus the cash rate where it's gone to, it's about managing that debt in a really methodical, responsible manner and making sure the debt goes into really good quality investment. So yes, there are doctors out there that are prepared to take on more risk in an interest rate environment where interest rates might go from 2% to 6%. Do they have the ability to liquidate or manage their cash flow? So I think cash flow management in the first 10 years of that journey is super important. And if they don't do that and they don't do it properly, I see more horror stories than I see successful outcomes. You can make it work, but you've got to be really careful where you're investing and what you're investing in.
So you're saying we could be in a position where you sort of mortgage to the hilt, and if something changes, you have to sell the house quickly.
Correct. So if they don't have
and then you're stuffed.
Yeah. So with our doctors, we say you need a 10% cash buffer. So basically, if they had a loan of 600,000, I would advise that particular doctor to have a cash buffer of about $60,000 sitting in their offset account, just to budget if they say they got sued for negligence or something went wrong within their careers. do they have the ability to hold that asset long term and ride through the market when we think there's probably a better opportunity to sell? I never want any doctor, when they're building their portfolio, to sell at the wrong time. And with our doctors' portfolios, we have what's called trading assets sitting in their portfolio, which are assets that are utilized to maybe pay down debt on the family home when they get older or upgrade the family home. And then we have foundation assets, which are assets that we hold for 20 years plus and we pass them down onto their kids. So cash flow management, having a cash buffer, they can get caught out quite easily. You've got to get the area right and the demographics. So if you can't find a tenant, does that doctor have the ability to cash flow that property if the property's vacant for more than 3 months, 6 months? So if they don't have that 10% cash buffer, I think there's trouble.
Can I ask, and this is, I think, maybe just society in general and just the way we are. And you tell me if I'm wrong, man. I think I am.
I will. I'll tell you if
So
you're wrong.
in my head, obviously, if I'm buying a car, I just feel like $100,000 car is going to be better than a $50,000 car. So when you're buying real estate, I think it's the feelings like a $2 million house is going to be better than a $1 million house. But I presume that's not necessarily the case for investing,
Not at all.
right? So just because you put $2 million in doesn't mean you're going to get more money back.
So I found there's someone there. I heard a recent comment the other day. Like, you have to be really, really careful when it comes to buying those bright, new, shiny toys. It's always about making sure that you build your investment portfolio up to a point and you invest in other businesses or other particular types of opportunities that will generate that income. And then when you have that income and it's coming in consistently, then go and buy those bright, new, shiny toys. But like your studies, you have to remain committed. You have to have a bit of a plan and a process in place, and you stick to that plan. If you deviate and you get sucked into what everyone else is doing and having their little avocado, there's some commentary out there that people are making, and people's ability to live and be disciplined and be consistent with their investment methodology and how they look at building this portfolio, if they do it in the right manner, they will get that shiny car within 10 or 15 years. But for the time being, allocate a certain amount of your income to help building that portfolio. And then if you remain committed, you'll be far ahead of your friend that's owned that $100,000 car that's depreciated in value. I bought a little a Mitsubishi Colt. It was $1,500 when I first got my license. I bought my first investment property at 18. Like, it's not, you've just got to remain committed to this kind of portfolio strategy, but it's hard. And when you're younger, it's going to be the hardest that you're going to feel it. But I want all my doctors feeling that pain, because over time it becomes easier. And if they start being spendthrifts at an early age, I can tell you what, in 10 or 15 years time, they're going to have a lot more debt than that doctor that was educating themselves and investing wisely in the first 10 years.
I've got a embarrassing story, which is when I was in my resident year. Again, not earning very much. I think it was $24 an hour. I bought myself an Audi sports car.
Oh no.
20. It was, how much did I pay? I
How
paid
much?
75,000, which was already down from 150,000. So it was the person who first bought it
Oh, bargain.
paid 150K. 3 years later it was 75, and I sold it 3 years after that for 24.
Yeah. Well, there
So
you go.
that's the depreciation we're dealing with. It was a good lesson for me. I was like, imagine if I put it somewhere else. Or the thing with objects, and this is going, sorry to go on a bit of a
Tangent. Yeah.
tangent. It's not more than a tangent, like a life lesson. You can have nice stuff, and it's nice having nice stuff. And I have a little sports car now. But whatever you buy, and I find this with houses as well. So wherever you buy, wherever you live, you get that excitement for the first couple months, and then it just becomes normal. So for that fancy car, I loved it for the first 3 months, and then it just became my normal car.
Well,
So like it,
yeah, I think if you're like, yeah, we are getting pretty deep here, but if you're driven by materialistic sort of gains or materialistic view on the world, when it comes to property, don't get emotional about it and make sure that you're making the right call based on its fundamentals. And a lot of A lot of our younger doctors don't like the color of the roof, or they don't like the color of the kitchen. This is not about looking at the kind of granular details in relation to that particular aesthetics of that property. It's more around making sure the data makes sense, making sure you're buying in the right time of the cycle, making sure you're getting the required rent and the vacancy rate for that asset makes sense, so you can rent it out within a reasonable time frame. And I tell you what our doctors get a kick out of. They come and meet with us and they say, Phil, I don't like buying in, say, Adelaide. I never liked Adelaide. I've never liked Perth. I've never liked Brisbane. I said, at the end of the day, you're not living in this particular property. This is an asset to grow and invest, and these are the reasons why we're doing it. So there's a key logic around this. And a lot of doctors don't like this when we have this initial conversation. What they do like, in 4 to 5 years when the asset's growing and they've got capacity to go and buy the next one, they can then get used to seeing that their portfolio growing, and then they buy asset 2, asset 3. So it just, don't get caught up in the initial fanfare of it looks shiny and it looks, have your fun in life, but make sure that you contribute a certain amount of your income into growing your investment portfolio. And it doesn't just have to be property. It can be other things we can't advise on, but just start and make sure that you commit that amount of your wage to building this something for you. Because I can tell you what, those people that buy all that stuff now in 10 years' time will have nothing. It's just a show. It's just a front.
It's a deep life lesson there, Phil.
Yeah, we're getting deep.
The next question I have for you. Now we've gone through some, and I think some getting good advice, especially it means a good life lesson on not having that discipline and not spending too much on shiny things. I guess the next question for you is like, what can you practically actually do? So, I mean, the questions that I get on the Facebook group is, where do you invest? And currently there's a lot of chatter around Melbourne, and there was a couple of years ago, there was a lot of chatter around Perth. And what should you be buying? Like apartments and houses? I mean, you mentioned that as a junior doctor, you should consider rent vesting, which is what I did back in the day. But these are, I think, more specific questions that people definitely want to hear about. So let's wrap up nice and deep. And I think for our next one, I'd love to hear your answers on, especially what in the world is happening with Melbourne, because those two are very strange markets.
Yeah. So we can talk about Melbourne in the next podcast. We can talk about Perth.
Love to know, because I don't understand it. I've been watching it, and it's just crazy to me. But and I live in Melbourne, so I definitely want to know what is going to happen in my home city.